No, they were built in factories. They have factory standards, factory contours.
When you think of Joe Bonamassa, you think of a man who has mastered every note, every chord, and every stage he's ever stepped on. But behind that cool, blues rock composure lies a musician who's seen and heard it all. From the smoky clubs of New York to the grand stages of London, Joe's journey through the world of guitar legends hasn't always been smooth. For decades, Bonamassa has played alongside and against some of the best guitarists in the world. And while he's usually the picture of class and humility, there are 7 names that have stuck with him for all the wrong reasons. These are not just rivals. They're players who pushed him, frustrated him, and even made him question his place in the music world. From backstage insults to on-stage showdowns, Joe's experiences reveal the rarely discussed darker side of the guitar world, where ego meets excellence, and talent sometimes comes with attitude. Today, we dive deep into the story of the 7 guitarists Joe Bonamassa admitted he couldn't stand, and the shocking reasons behind those feelings. Some names might surprise you, and others might make perfect sense. Before Joe Bonamassa became a household name in the world of blues rock, he was just a kid with a guitar, obsessively practicing in his room in upstate New York. By the time he was 12, he was already opening for B.B. King, a dream most guitarists spend a lifetime chasing. But what no one saw was how those early years, filled with both admiration and confrontation, would shape Joe's complex relationship with other musicians, especially guitarists he later admitted he simply couldn't stand. Growing up, Joe worshipped the legends: Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Albert King. Their records were his textbooks, their solos his language. But when he began performing alongside seasoned musicians, reality hit hard. Many of those who inspired him were also fiercely protective of their legacy. The blues world, though outwardly brotherly, was fiercely competitive behind closed doors. Everyone wanted to be the one who carried the torch. Joe quickly discovered that not every handshake backstage was sincere. He once recalled playing at a small festival early in his career and overhearing a veteran guitarist mocking his tone, saying, "The kid sounds like he's playing from a textbook, not a soul." It stung deeply. Not because of who said it, but because Joe had modeled so much of his style after that very musician. That was the first time he realized that admiration and envy often walked hand in hand in the music industry. The bitterness didn't stop there. As Joe's reputation grew, so did the whispers. Some claimed he was too clean for blues. Others accused him of turning an authentic genre into arena rock for the masses. For a while, Joe tried to ignore it. He poured everything into his music, into every note, every riff, every solo that echoed his dedication. But privately, he began keeping mental notes of those who had gone out of their way to dismiss or belittle him. It wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. He wanted to remember who doubted him when he was still climbing. In a later interview, Joe admitted, "I didn't hate them for their talent. I hated how small they made me feel when I was just trying to learn." Yet even in those tough moments, Joe refused to compromise. Instead of backing down, he worked harder. He spent countless nights perfecting his tone, studying vintage amps, and finding a sound that blended old-school blues emotion with modern rock power. He didn't want to imitate. He wanted to innovate. Ironically, that innovation only added fuel to the fire. Traditionalists claimed he was too flashy. Some blues purists accused him of diluting the genre. But to Joe, it wasn't about being traditional or modern, it was about being true. "If you play with heart," he once said, "then it's the blues, no matter how loud it is." The early years of his career weren't just about building a name. They were about learning who to trust, who to ignore, and who to quietly outplay. Every insult became motivation, every sneer another spark. Slowly, Joe began turning that frustration into fuel, transforming every ounce of bitterness into blistering guitar solos that silenced critics and electrified audiences. But still, deep down, some names remained etched in his mind. 7 guitarists who, for one reason or another, pushed his patience and pride to the edge. Some were once idols, others rivals, and a few simply arrogant beyond measure. And though Joe rarely names names in interviews, insiders know exactly who they are and why their stories became some of the most intense chapters in Joe Bonamassa's journey to the top. As Joe, Bonamassa's name began to echo across the world's biggest stages. He found himself shoulder to shoulder with the very legends he had once idolized. From smoky blues clubs in London to grand arenas in Nashville, Joe was now sharing lineups with the icons who had inspired him as a kid. But fame has a strange way of changing things. Admiration can quickly turn into friction, and mutual respect can sour into quiet resentment. Joe's rise was meteoric, but it also made him a target. Many of the old-school blues guitarists viewed him as an outsider, someone who had bypassed the traditional pay-your-dues path. To them, Joe was too young, too polished, and too commercially successful for a genre rooted in pain and struggle. One legendary guitarist, a figure Joe had once called his hero, reportedly dismissed him during a rehearsal, saying, "You play too clean. The blues is supposed to be dirty." That comment cut deep. Joe respected authenticity more than anything, but he refused to believe that clarity and precision made him any less genuine. "I don't need to sound broken to play the blues," he later said in an interview. "I just need to mean every note." The tension didn't stop there. Another iconic musician, known for his explosive stage presence and unpredictable attitude, once refused to perform alongside Joe at a festival in Chicago. His reason? He thought Joe didn't have enough soul. The incident left Joe stunned. "It's strange," he said later. "These were the same guys who inspired me to pick up a guitar. And now they were shutting doors in my face." But Joe's frustration wasn't limited to the older generation. As new waves of guitarists emerged, young players obsessed with speed and flash, Joe began feeling disconnected from them too. He found many of them technically gifted but emotionally hollow. "They can play 1,000 notes a minute," he remarked, "but not one that makes you feel something." One of the names that reportedly got under his skin was a modern rock guitarist known for his wild on-stage antics and overproduced sound. Joe once compared him to a circus act with a guitar. While he didn't name the artist, fans have long speculated who it was. What's clear is that Joe believed the art of subtlety, the slow burn of emotion, was being lost in a flood of showmanship, but perhaps the most painful clash came with a British blues veteran whom Joe had deeply admired. The two met during a European tour, and at first things seemed friendly. They talked guitars, tone, and the history of blues. But during a live radio interview, the veteran blindsided Joe by criticizing his music, calling it soulless blues rock for people who don't understand the real thing. It was a betrayal Joe didn't see coming. "I sat there, smiling, trying not to react," he later recalled. "But inside, I was crushed." That moment stayed with him for years, not because of the insult itself, but because of who said it. These experiences began to change Joe's view of the industry. The heroes he once worshipped were no longer untouchable. They were human, flawed, and often bitter about their own fading relevance. He realized that the music world wasn't just about talent. It was about ego, survival, and sometimes insecurity disguised as criticism. Instead of letting the negativity consume him, Joe used it as creative fuel. Every jab, every dismissive comment became a reason to play better. When one critic said he would never fill arenas, Joe responded not with words, but with action, selling out the Royal Albert Hall in London. "I learned that hate is just another form of fear," Joe said years later. "Some people hate what they can't control, and in this case, that was me." By this point, Bonamassa's list of 7 hated guitarists wasn't just about personal dislike. It was a reflection of the battles every artist faces when success threatens the old order. But for Joe, those rivalries were far from over. What happened next would completely reshape his understanding of music, humility, and respect. As Joe Bonamassa's career soared, the anger that once fueled his ambition began to fade into something more reflective. The rivalries, the dismissive comments, and the public criticisms that had once stung him were now part of a larger picture. The story of a musician growing into his own. The 7 guitarists he claimed to hate had, in their own way, taught him the most valuable lessons of his career. But it took time, experience, and humility for Joe to see it that way. By his late 30s, Joe had accomplished everything most musicians could only dream of. Sold-out world tours, platinum records, and critical acclaim. Yet, instead of basking in fame, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him there. He began to realize that many of the conflicts he'd had weren't just about ego. They were about perspective. "You start to see that everyone's fighting their own battle," he once said. "Even the ones who seem untouchable." One of the most transformative moments came during a blues festival in Europe. Joe was scheduled to perform right after a guitarist who had publicly criticized him years earlier. A man he once swore he would